There's the thumbs up.
Okay, there we go.
Anderson, yep.
All right.
Okay. Okay, Laura's doing her report.
So am I starting over then?
Yep.
Yes, okay. So again, starting out with a number of different updates regarding what we've done over the past couple of months. Starting with planning, we've had a substantial amount of work in grant administration for a bunch of different projects. They can be quite a bit of work. For example, the LWRP Trails grant that we've been working on, progress report was just submitted and it was 781 pages of documents. So they can be a great deal of work. That leads me to the fact that the assessor's project contract was actually rejected by the state controller's office.
Laura, is that the contract between us and the contractor or between us and the state?
Us and the state. So what happens is when we do a state contract for any grant, the state agency normally sends us the contract for signature first. Then they go back to the state agency for execution. But before the state agency approves them, they go to the controller's office. In this case, what happened was there was a particular document that the controller's office wanted to see submitted that Department of State didn't submit when they submitted it to the controller's office. That caused the controller's office to reject the contract, put it back to the beginning of the queue with Department of State. So it has been corrected and it has been resubmitted. It was submitted on April 30th. I checked with Department of State to see if we could get an idea as to when we were going to have an executed contract, and they can't give me an estimate. So we should be aware that as of right now for that assessor's project, we are working without a state contract. I haven't been given any indication that it's going to be a problem, but because of those technical difficulties, we do not as of right now have a contract. Okay. Next planning subject.
Before we move on,
Yep.
do you happen to know have we paid any invoices to the contractor on that?
I don't believe so, because I'm going to imagine Laura Chadwick would have asked us to help with the drawdown process.
I think she did put a value in there, better check.
Yeah, yes, I think there has been.
There has been?
Yeah, there-
Okay.
All right.
No reason though to foresee that we wouldn't get this. It was just the Department of State didn't do their part. Now that it's done, it should be smooth.
It had to do with the fact that because we had put out the RFP before the contract was submitted, there was this document called the Vendor Responsibility Questionnaire. I think somewhere along the line, the state got sued for somebody doing stupid, and they wanted the Vendor Responsibility Questionnaire signed before the contract was executed because we had already gone out to RFP. There was nothing saying we couldn't go out to RFP. It was just that the Department of State should have given us this document to have signed by the contractor and included it with the state contract document. So again, it's been fixed and it's been resubmitted. I have not been given any indication that there's a further problem, but it's a technical difficulty that held up the execution of the contract.
The short answer to have we paid anybody on the assessment grant is yes, we have.
Okay.
we paid $150,000 to the vendor.
I think Laura wants to pay that.
And
150,000?
$150,000.
That's the total now?
No, that's what we paid so far.
to Laura's credit, she was trying to join us on YouTube and couldn't figure out why we started.
Sorry about that, folks. Got a problem. So, I mean, it's going to be up to the board as to how far you want to progress on that without a contract, because again, I just asked again last week, and because of COVID and staffing levels at Department of State, he cannot even give me an estimate as to when we're going to get that contract back.
Chris, should we reach out to whoever our comptroller connection was last week and see if they could give us an answer?
last week, but we do have a regional,
There's gotta be somebody in their office that could help
yeah,
us
we
out
got a
here.
regional local government rep that we can reach out to.
Al?
Well, and I would caution not just this, but any grant, starting them before we have these contracts. I normally like to see these contracts in place. I wasn't aware that this one wasn't. We normally have these contracts in place before we start the work.
That is true, and it was discussed back in February that we didn't have a contract, but I mean, I believe the project started because there was a level of comfort that we were going to have the contract. There's not ever been any indication that there was going to be a problem with it, but I agree with you, Al. I normally would suggest, because technical difficulties can happen, that it's always safer not to proceed unless the contract is executed.
Where are we, Laura?
Okay, so I'm just coming to, so the contract, we've already started, working with the contractors, gonna do the reval. They've already done, a couple videos, ready to start data collection actually this week up in, if not last Thursday, Friday of last week, data collection up in the town of Dresden. And, I didn't know there was an issue, so, yeah.
What's the total contract, and we paid $150,000?
$667,000.
Yeah. Yeah, the grant was for $590, and we spent the additional money.
And it's a pretty substantial grant.
So now what is the issue,
Remember a couple of months ago, we sent emails back and forth that the state was looking for additional documentation, the vendor responsibility questionnaire that GAR ended up filling out.
yeah, and we sent that back.
They sent it back, and it's all been resubmitted, but the state rejected our contract with the Department of State because that documentation wasn't included in Department of State's submission of the contract to the State Controller's Office.
Oh.
The Controller bounced it. That's when all those emails went back and forth. It's been corrected and it's been resubmitted, but we don't have an executed contract yet. Any other questions?
We're closer.
We're closer. Yeah. Okay, so next subject is the DPW highway project. That took quite a bit of working with the consultants to get a final report that was acceptable to both us and to Department of State. We're in the process of closing out the project. We just received the final draft at some point. I'm sure it will be presented to the board for review and decision as to kind of what we do from there. But from our standpoint, the contractors and consultants did what they were supposed to do, and we have a final report. Deb Donahue and Chris have been through it, and then the next step will just be what the board decides to do. Similarly, we are required by DEC to have a hazardous waste management plant. That is true even though we are not in the business of managing waste any longer. We're still supposed to have a plan. So we have, and I say we, the rail we, Pamela has done a lot of work on this. She's been working on it off and on since last fall. We have a draft finished of that. Essentially what it ended up being is largely a data dump because we obviously don't control what happens to the waste, but it's simply sort of a recounting of historical data, what data we could collect from current operators. We've been working with DEC on it, so they're fine with the format that we've put it in. Once it's been reviewed here, it goes back to DEC for final approval, and then I assume we probably have to adopt it. So, but that one's getting close as well. As the COVID emergency progresses, we have tried to keep resources available, connections and links to other entities that might be able to offer businesses and residents help. Right now, what's happened is there was so much that happened so quickly, we just kept dumping things on the web page until it's gotten to the point where it's hard to find things. So we're in the process of taking it all down now, getting rid of some of the historical, when I say historical, over the past couple of months, the resources that were available, and trying to make it a little bit easier to navigate and more current. Census, and I forgot to double check the numbers this morning. We have continued to do outreach as much as we could. For example, the food event, the food pantry event that was held in the fairgrounds, we distributed flyers for that. We've got other flyers. We've given a banner to the town of Fort Anne, who are going to put it on the outside of the town hall. What I would like to do is be able to circulate that banner around to other towns for those that are having lower response rates and want to encourage more people to fill out the survey, or the census, I should say. I can tell you right now, Dresden, Putnam, and Fort Anne have the lowest response rate, so I'm hoping that that banner up in Fort Anne will help a lot, and again, we can circulate it around. What will happen is the census takers are in the process of being trained to start to do the door-to-door census. So that, I anticipate, is going to start happening, I think, at the end of July.
Do we have a percentage of what's actually done?
If you look on our planning page on the website, we are updating weekly every single town and what your response rate is.
Okay.
So, yeah, you can check the individual rates. Next subject on planning is trails. The Fort Anne to Whitehall project has kind of been in hiatus since the beginning of the year because we've been in discussions with CP Rail, real estate people up in Canada as to the alignment of the trail without infringing on their, on the certain distances of the tracks that they want to see put. So trying to work to get the path as far away from wetlands as possible and as close to the rail as possible and as inexpensive as possible. But we've been sitting waiting for CP Rail. So on economic development, I will tell you right now, the unemployment numbers, although the official May data is not out, I regularly keep up with what the actual raw data is, which is the weekly unemployment claims. And up until the week ending the 6th of June, we had 5,828 initial filings for unemployment. So I'm going to say that that means that we're hovering around 18 to 19% right now. As June goes on and we start seeing people return to the workforce, I would expect those numbers to fluctuate. There may, in fact, continue to be new filings for unemployment, but I would hope that as more people go back to work, that will mitigate that number somewhat.
Is that the highest you've seen since you've been here?
Oh, yeah, the unemployment rate until before COVID started was at under 3%.
Yeah, but we've been a lot higher than 3%, but we hadn't been this high in the teens any of the time we've been here.
No, even during the Great Recession, I'd have to go back and look, but I'm going to guess we were probably 10, 11%, something like that.
And hopefully this, even though it's higher, is for a far shorter time, is our hope.
That would be the hope, yes. On response to COVID, again, trying to make sure that we are interconnecting resources as much as possible. We field phone calls from people constantly, just looking for assistance. What are the funding resources? And as you can imagine, we talk about this on the county opening committee. People interested in, during the early stages, what was an essential business? Am I essential, am I not? Now it's what does phase 1 mean versus phase 3, and what can I do and can I open, et cetera. So, we are not the only ones, but we are certainly still fielding phone calls from businesses. Workforce Development Board, as you know, I'm one of the county appointees to the board. There have been some issues at the board, as Chris alluded to in the last finance meeting, that have resulted in some very strained relationships between the career centers of Warren, Washington, and Saratoga County. There's been largely a communications disconnect with the board that has to do with what are the roles and responsibilities via the WIOA legislation and what degree of oversight does the board have with the career centers? What is the level of responsibility of reporting career centers to the board, contractual responsibilities, et cetera. There have been a number of recent resignations, as I believe Chris also alluded to. There is a number of open seats that are vacant right now and are coming up. So, there's already been some corrections and some improvements. One of the suggestions that I had made, we haven't been doing a very good job of posting public notices and resources that are made available to the board. That has changed. They're now starting to directly post things on the WIB website. So again, I think improvement is coming there, but there were communications breakdowns that led to problems that there are a number of board members are trying very hard to make sure that they get corrected. But it has taken up a fair bit of time as well.
Yes, and there are continued issues, and Al and I had some email exchanges last week.
Right. So again, I'm just an awareness that it's been a time-consuming headache, let's put it that way. HVADC, I asked Todd to give me just a quick update on their activities during COVID. They've provided technical assistance, especially during the early stages of a number of agricultural entities that wanted to be declared essential businesses, so they were able to help with that. As you also may know, during the initial rules related to the CARES Act, farms and agriculture were excluded from a number of things. HVADC participated in a lot of the sort of lobbying and negotiations and discussions as to how agriculture should be included in what eligible assistance and funding there was through the CARES Act. They also received some funding from a philanthropic source, which allows them, so say, for example, you're a farm and you have a number of different options as to, do I do the Paycheck Protection Program? What loans am I available to? They can provide assistance to help hire somebody to help the farm or the ag business work through what the best resource for them to follow up on is. In addition to the LDC, which has ag funding, HVADC still has the JDA loan fund that we've talked about over time, which is $25,000 to $100,000. It's primarily targeted for equipment. We haven't really used this yet because, unlike some of the other counties in HVADC's footprint who do not have an LDC, we have an LDC. But that funding is still available to ag businesses in the county. And also, we mentioned last time that the Northern Border funding that HVADC was aware of that will allow us to use the $25,000 payment that we make to HVADC as potential match to get funding to help with ag businesses. All the contractual stuff with the state of Vermont has been worked out, and they're ready to roll that out. So what we probably will do is ask for assistance from probably the Farm Bureau and maybe Cornell to make farms aware that there is funding resource available to them, largely for technical assistance. Next ED item is broadband. As you can imagine, given the COVID crisis and people trying to work from home, broadband has become an even hotter topic than it was. So I reached out to all of the providers to get an update as to where we are in terms of deployment of the broadband for all new passes and construction that was happening. So Spectrum, as we know, they had a build-out obligation to do 145,000 new passes by September 30th of 2021. Spectrum tells me they are ahead of schedule. They're effectively done in Washington County in terms of meeting the actual obligation, but that doesn't mean that they won't continue as opportunity presents itself to do additional build-outs, but in terms of what they plan on doing to address the 145,000, they're complete in Washington County. Verizon tells me they are on track to complete their build-out by the end of the year. They tell me that they're about 99% done in Washington County. There's a few odds and ends. There were also early on some overbilling and fee errors for a number of Verizon subscribers. My understanding is that since been corrected. Basically, they were, charging for certain things that were not supposed to be charged for given the Broadband for All funding. But again, I believe that's been corrected. Slick, the make-ready work has mostly been done at the northern end of the county, down to the Salem area. There are gaps because apparently what's been happening is as Verizon and Grid upgrade their poles, they're not necessarily doing it in a geographical continual area. So what's happening is Slick is having to hop from place to place as Grid and Verizon finish their pole work. They are expecting that they're going to start hookups in the Putnam and Dresden area probably sometime in August, and then they will be working south from there, and meanwhile continuing to clean up the make-ready area work in the rest of the obligated areas. They are hoping to be substantially complete by the end of the year, but if that does not happen, it will definitely be by the first quarter of 2021. There are, I will say, in broadband in general, there are some concerns. One of the things that might affect, like how quickly, since Slick is the one that still has construction left to do, hurricane season could affect them because one of the things that tends to happen is pole and linemen get deployed, and if they lose all of those linemen, that's one of the things that will impact whether they can get everything done by the end of this year or it might wait. The other thing, and I don't know how many are aware of this, but as part of the state budget, it was sort of a last-minute thing, as I understand. New York State DOT implemented a fiber line tax on any fiber that's on the state right-of-way. That tax ranges from, I think it's like 20 cents a mile to thousands of dollars a mile. So supposedly, the providers cannot, that tax, first of all, the tax does not apply to the providers that are implementing as part of the rural broadband program, the state funding. But they can and are being taxed on their existing network, and they're told that they can't pass that tax along to customers. The net result of that in rural areas, because there are areas where it's $1,000 a mile, and if you've got a rural broadband provider who's already struggling to make it when you have densities of 6 or 7 houses a mile, there are already some projects that up in the North Country that have been canceled because of this. So I just think that we need to be aware that in addition to the Broadband for All program, which as we know has not in Washington County resulted in Broadband for All, I would say most, but not all. So the cleanup will be looking at all of the areas once this deployment has been finished by all of the awardees, to start trying to look at those that did get left out and still do not have service, and how are you going to come up with a program and funding to continue deployment to those areas that did get left out of the current programming, and there are some. One of the ways that can be addressed, as we recall from the Broadband for All program, which took some of the FCC Connect money and married it to the state broadband funding in order to widen the reach of the funding. The Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, or RDOF, 904 auction opened in early June. So essentially, just like the other auctions, there are a number of census blocks across the state that are eligible for federal funding. And there is a map. I can get everybody a link to it or send it out. I took a look at it. What I see in it is that there are some very spotty, small areas. There are a couple of slightly larger blocks in Whitehall, Hampton, Fort Edward, White Creek, and Cambridge. So just like the Broadband for All program, what this is going to result in is a bidding situation where a provider goes and looks at those census blocks and decides whether they want to bid on the funding. I believe both Hudson Valley Wireless and SLIC are looking and trying to determine whether they want to bid. But I would encourage you all, again, I can send you the links to the map. I would encourage you to take a look at the map of what is eligible in your town and any particular areas that you think are really critical to serve. We can try and reach out to the existing providers and say, you know, how can we make this happen? Does it make sense to add this to your network and your deployment? But as of right now, there is some additional funding and there are some additional identified qualified areas that are mapped out through RDOF.
Well, I know Hebron's a big portion of this like part, and they're gonna hook somewhere in the cells so there's a whole fiber connection instead of just a link down there. Do we know where in the cells or how far south they're going?
I have maps upstairs. Off the top of my head, I can't recall, but I will tell you
Because
that.
the last time we talked to the engineer, they didn't know where they were going when they went south.
Yeah, I will tell you, I mean, given my own personal situation, which is one of the ones that's left out.
No, we know where it's going.
Yeah, really, no. I have had conversations with SLIC because there are several blocks of areas in Jackson, in White Creek, and a few other areas that are part of where Verizon reported us as served, and yet we have basically very slow DSL. So I know I've at least had some conversations with SLIC about how far down they might be able to run, and they're looking at it and they're looking at Jackson, But
that looks to me where they were, I thought that's what they were inferring, but this was back when Dave and Matt and I met in Hampton. This was a while ago now. Is that a year?
More than that.
It's gotta be a year since we talked to the
Couple
engineer.
years.
And they really hadn't figured exactly where they were gonna, you know, hook the backbone at the end when they got done. So, and I think it's down in your direction, but I don't know exactly where.
yeah, I don't have the maps yet. SLIC is going to send them to me. I haven't gotten them yet, which will indicate where they're planning based on the current rounds to finish deploying. I mean, I know where the maps are in terms of the territories that were awarded to them, but I believe they're going a bit beyond that, and they're trying to, I guess, connect the dots as it makes sense for them and as expense happens. But again, keep in mind that new DOT tax now affects how much further people are willing to stretch to run fiber, because if it's, for example, if they run it up and down 22, they're going to get taxed on it. So they have to include that in their permutations, their calculations as to whether it's going to be.
Pass on the church.
According to the state, they can. Right, yeah.
Laura, my question is what about the ones that were supposed to be served by HughesNet? Good.
So just so the board's aware, this is gonna sound like a non sequitur, but I'm gonna bring it back. It appears that at the federal level, the Senate majority and the House Democrats started negotiating at the staff level early last week on the next round of the stimulus money. Right now, it's looking like probably after August recess is when they might act. So through NISAC and NACO, we had some calls last week, and NISAC was trying to compile a list of infrastructure needs at the county level to put into Senate majority staff to try to have as part of this fourth stimulus, because there's been some talk from the Senate Republicans that stimulus money would be more attractive to them if it were tied to infrastructure. So I put in that, of course, we have roads, bridges, we have need for, money for I put forward was rural broadband. And I used the COVID-19, as Laura started out her presentation with, as the stay-at-home orders, the distance learning, the telework, all that kind of stuff has highlighted the digital divide and how it disproportionately affects rural communities. And so the argument I typed up a little, like, one-pager for NISAC to put in was that we should include fiber to every home as part of the infrastructure bill in phase 4 of the stimulus if it were to get that far. And I argued that we should probably view it like we view rural electrification in the 20th century. So impose a tax on urban and suburban areas that are already completely served by fiber, take that money, put it in a central federal fund, and then use that to extend fiber optic networks into rural communities, just like we did with electricity in the beginning of the 20th century. So, and I actually used the example of under the New York State Broadband program that large swaths of our county and huge swaths of the North Country are deemed served by HughesNet, and yet, as we've all found throughout this, trying to do Zoom meetings and the like, that doesn't work. So it would be interesting to see if we get any movement from the Fed on that.
Okay. Dave O'Brien has been waiting.
So I was going to ask about the satellite, but the surprising thing is that while Hampton has been not very covered by internet, we now have two companies overlaying each other in some places. And knowing some of the future builds, one company is going to fill in the gaps where there was satellite, but it was really surprising that we're going to have two companies running the same routes, one funded by the government, one funded by themselves, New York State. So it was really unique to see that happen. And both companies that are mentioned, Spectrum and Slick, are working on that project right now. So just an interesting comment.
Anybody else have a comment on broadband? Brian? Sorry, forgot you.
Well, with HughesNet, it does work. When I go Zoom from home, I had to update HughesNet because with my wife being a teacher and being on Zoom meetings, sometimes were the same days, but always within that same month, we would go through, piles of megabytes and data or gigabit, whatever we're using. And so I had to upgrade, and I don't know that I've seen a difference in how quality of it was, but everything's available now, at least. So it does work for like a Zoom meeting. I think if you were running movies, all that stuff together, I think you'd be off the network. I mean, I just don't think it'll carry it. But, averaging probably 3 to 4 Zoom meetings a week, which we had to be in our household with the upgrade, it does work. It'll do that much. And it's better than nothing. But I still don't know what any of this other stuff does because we don't have it neither. But as soon as we do, I'll let you know if it's a lot better than that.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Chris that the whole work from home, school at home has really highlighted the digital divide, and it's created a lot of significant problems. I mean, it decreases functionality and makes me rip my hair out. But anyway, any other questions on broadband? Nope.
Good job.
Okay, tourism. So as we've noted before, when the COVID crisis first hit, we moved our tourism programming from being largely marketing and branding the county to areas outside the county to attract people in, to try and become a public service messaging entity, because what we wanted was residents within the county to be able to understand what businesses within the county were open, how they were providing services, et cetera. As we move through phases of reopening, we are, through our social media, continuing to message and promote as much as we can anybody who's opening, information about when, what's changing, et cetera. I will say I have a serious concern right now that the I Love New York funding is at risk. We were awarded $60,000 in I Love New York. we have a county budget of 82.5, and we had $10,000 allocated to Cornell Cooperative Extension to do agritourism-related activities. We've spent about $55,000 in total to date. Normally, the I Love New York funding is deposited into our account in sort of a February-ish timeframe. Early on, we were hearing from state tourism authorities that they understood that messaging couldn't be about attracting people in because that's not what you wanted to do, and they were going to sort of loosen up the regulations about marketing within your county or your region as opposed to marketing without. And the messaging was, you know, everything's going to be fine. We're still working on getting the money to you. Fast forward to June, that messaging has changed so that I Love New York is no longer approving any expenses. They have not deposited the money, and they have not indicated when, and the messaging that we're starting to hear is starting to include the word if. So there's a pretty...
Does that mean if I Love New York?
Correct, but there's a fairly serious concern as to whether we're going to love New York or whether we're going to have any funding at all, or what is very likely, at least, is reduced amounts of funding. So if we do not have confirmation by July, my strategy is we're going to adjust spending on the tourism budget to spend no more than the $82,000 county budget. The Cornell Cooperative Extension funding, back in January, February, we got off to a really good start, and there were some good things that got done, but obviously that got cut off. I'm not sure as things progress, how much more we'll do of that towards the end of the year, but at the very least, I don't want to spend any more than the county budget without affirmation that we're actually going to get paid by the state. So in relation to that, I will say that we have been talking about instituting some sort of a bed tax program on Airbnb entities for, a couple of years now. If we had been able to get that done by now, we would have a revenue source. But, as we all know, because of legislation and a bunch of other things, it hasn't progressed. So I asked Andrew to take a look at some sample agreements that other counties have instituted with Airbnb and similar hosts, because not knowing what the state budget is going to look like for next year, if we can solve the Airbnb revenue issue, it impacts our budget. So with that, I'm going to ask Andrew to kind of go over what he's found, and then we'll take some questions from that.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. So this is kind of skipping down to the end of my report, but I'll start with this. I spoke to several counties that are similar to us, and then they have agreements with Airbnb to collect occupancy tax, some of which have laws similar to ours that do not include vacation rentals as part of their occ tax law. So they entered into this agreement without changing their law. It's an agreement between the county and Airbnb to collect this fee. That fee is 3%. That's their standard. So there's 28 counties in New York that have this agreement with Airbnb. I also spoke to Saratoga County, Albany County, who do not have one of these agreements, and they do not collect occupancy tax on vacation rentals. They want to, they just are waiting to have the law changed, because if the way that the Airbnb agreement is it is 3% of the take from the host. It was 3%, but that was not changed if you changed your law and said, all right, our law is 4% or it's 5%. 5% is what it is in Essex County, which they just raised it by 2%. So if you have an agreement with Airbnb and then you change the law, that the way the agreement is written right now, for these other counties, they are not able to change that agreement for the Airbnb platform. So those counties are waiting to change the law so that they say, okay, we're going to do 4%, and then in 2 years they want to raise it to 5%, and in 2 years they want to raise it to 6%. They don't have to make a new agreement with Airbnb. If there's a law in place, Airbnb will follow the law that's in place. So based on last year, the revenue that we got through all the rooms data, which takes the statistics from Airbnb, vacation rental by owner, HomeAway, and others. Just on the Airbnb side, there was 1,900,600, 196, 109, 1 million, sorry. The number's so big I can't even say it. 1,967,781. There we go. I've been teaching 7-year-old math and I can't even say it right. So, and if we entered into the agreement of Airbnb of that 3%, we would be able to collect $59,033. That's based on last year's numbers. Obviously, this year's numbers are going to see a decrease. However, we did see our Airbnb remain kind of flat for April, which spoke to the fact that people were escaping the city and coming up here and hanging out in Airbnbs. So that $60,000, ironically, is the same amount that we get from I Love New York. Now that's just Airbnb. If we were to collect it on all other vacation rentals, we'd be looking at a figure that's probably double that. So about $120,000. For example, here's another county that I can't pronounce. Cattaraugus, thank you. They have a similar similar to Washington County. You know, their population is a little more, but is close to us. They collected $157,000 in OC tax in 2019, but they did raise it up to 5%. Tompkins County, where Ithaca is, was the first county to collect occupancy tax, and that they entered in that in 2016. But Tompkins County does have a lot of other hotels, and so their total occupancy tax collections is over $2 million. So that's what I found out. You know, basically the choice is: do we enter an agreement with Airbnb without changing the law, or do we attempt to change the law and be able to increase that tax percentage for years to come?
Brian has a question.
Yeah, Andrew, in order to do the other vacation rentals, we do have to change the law, is that correct?
So the other vacation rental companies have entered into agreements with municipalities. It's just not as straightforward as Airbnb.
Okay, now when you refer to other vacation rentals, they aren't included in our law, so they would have to be another agreement or a law change.
Correct.
Okay. Is 3% what we would assume would we get it, I don't know if the board would even try to get more than 3% if we were to change the law. I guess that's what I don't know.
4% now?
Property tax is 4.
Right, I would stick with the
Okay.
occupancy tax. Yeah, I wouldn't change it from the occupancy tax. I would stay right with the occupancy tax.
So your current occupancy tax is 4%, and the way it's stated right now, it's taxed on units that have 4 or more units, I believe is how it's written.
So in order to get Airbnb to go to 4, we have to change that language,
So we would
or
request,
just make a different agreement?
we would request two things if we, this is what I was told by our friends in Albany and Warren County. If we can get Airbnb to enter an agreement before the law is changed, we want a caveat in there that would state that if a law is enacted in the county, the law supersedes this agreement. Airbnb was not willing to do that so far with Warren and Albany and Saratoga, which is why they're waiting.
Andrew, that's the same up in Essex County too, Lake Placid region and out in the Finger Lakes as well, right?
That's correct. And Essex County just rose their tax to 5%.
Let me rephrase that. The state just allows them to charge that. It's not like, so we don't fix the rate. We have to, it's like sales tax.
It's like sales tax.
Right, we have to go to the state and ask for a rate change. So when the initial.
We ask for the authority to increase
To
our rate.
increase it, right. So when the initial bed tax was put in, it was put in at the 4%. If we desire to charge, on regular folks, so let's not talk about Airbnb for a second, okay? So if we wanted to change that to 5, 6, 7, or, well, anything more than 4, you can only charge less, we can do that on our own.
That's good.
But if we wanted to go to more than 4, we would have to go to the state and say, dear state, just like in sales tax, please give us authority to charge up to whatever that number is. So that is how sales tax works. So the counties that have 8% or some variation of 7% sales tax went to the state and said, please let us charge up to this amount, and the state gave them whatever the state gave them. So in order for us to charge more to the current folks, I'm leaving out the Airbnbs and all that stuff, we would have to ask state permission to do that. And then we are unique in our bed tax in that it does sunset every 3 years, okay? So then you have to keep going back and getting reauthorized every 3 years, okay? Or getting permission to charge whatever you're charging. Then, when you get the permission, it comes back to you to decide where within that range, whether it's 6 or whatever, you still have to reauthorize. So you have to pick your number. So we were given up to 4 the first time, and we chose to charge the full 4. We could charge anywhere between 0.01, I guess, and 4. Okay, so nowhere in our law are we allowed to charge anything to Airbnb because of the way it's structured. So in order to charge them, we are going to them and saying, hey, please charge us that. Now, the concern is that they'll say, all right, we'll do it. Because you're negotiating now, remember, there's no law behind you. You're negotiating, so they may say, our number's 3, and then you have no authority to get them to 4. The thing is, down the road, you don't want competitive imbalance, as in Essex County, so you'd like for them to at least stay proportional, if not on par with that. Now, at some point, there may come a time when the state legislature says, oh, there's a lot of revenue hanging out there. And they rewrite the definitions, because ours is fairly consistent. We were late to the game in the bed tax game to begin with.
Yeah.
So ours is fairly consistent with most of the other ones in counties our size in that language, which hasn't been changed since tourism cottages, I guess, is one of the things they reference in there. All you usually see of those is places on the side of the road that used to be, that kind of thing. So there's 2 things going on here. One is your private, for lack of a better term, negotiation with these other folks, okay? And each one of them is their own entity to talk to. And then there's our bed tax, which we are allowed to charge, think of it just like sales tax, at the sufferance of the state who sets the maximum rate at which we can do that.
Jimmy?
I just want everybody to understand that in order to get that bed tax increase, the occupancy tax increase from the state, I've been in 2 townships or 1 township in 1 county where we proposed to get that increase. Very difficult. I don't know what the parameters are, but I've been involved in trying to get that increase, and it just hasn't been come to fruition. And it was a long, drawn-out process, well over 1.5 years to 2 years. One was in southern Saratoga County, Clifton Park Township, and we didn't get anywhere with it. So that's just food for thought, on the trying to get that increase through the state.
Think mortgage tax. same
Does that
process.
take us 5 or 6 years?
Right.
Brian?
I don't want to be depressing,
So-
think of the process.
There's a couple things here. First of all, the contract, because we don't have anything written into our law that would charge B&Bs.
Right.
That would be a whole long drawn-out process to get that added. Is that correct?
Well, yes, it could be. So,
So
the
it
good
might
news
take the
is,
3% until you can get that added?
well, the good news is, there's now a model that they're used to seeing, okay, that other places have done. So going to them with a model that they understand, have negotiated in the past, is a lot easier than saying, we've come up with our own grand scheme of how to do this thing. So if you're okay with that model, then you're arguing over the rate, okay? The bad news is, there's already somewhat, according to Andrew, a fairly established rate. So what's the incentive to give you more? And then, of course, if Airbnb does this, and the other folks don't, it puts them at a competitive disadvantage. So they're gonna want, right, they're gonna wanna know, and if so, they're gonna wanna know, what are you doing with the other guys? And then, if you're on Airbnb, and then you all of a sudden realize that you have a 3% extra, your folks that are coming to rent whatever you're renting is, you might say, those guys over there don't have it, and switch. Not my problem, but at the same time, that's the thing with it. That's why you don't have, without that leveling influence of the state legislation, there's a competitive imbalance going on next door. So there's good news and there's bad news. That doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue it. I'm just saying that you're operating in two different arenas with raising the rate. The one, the state gives you authority to raise the rate, and then it's your decision whether or not to do it up to the cap. The other one is, how do you keep, unless they change the entire definition for everybody, which would be a heck of a lot easier, then it's like, all you people are charging the same rate, we're done. If that doesn't happen, however, then how do you maintain that competitive balance? And of course, I think they would like to go, obviously, this is me, I always tell you not to do this, don't read people's minds, and don't assume they're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this. But the point of fact is, they want certainty as well.
Right.
As well as we do for the residents.
Jim?
Yeah, Brian, if being an operator, if Airbnb is going to charge me 3% and VRBO doesn't, I'm taking my listing off Airbnb and putting it strictly on VRBO, so I save 3%. And if the county's not getting any tax dollars on it because there's no laws currently with Airbnbs on the county, I might not even submit my my tax form from VRBO, because who's collecting the taxes on it from the state or the county? If there's no laws on the books for it, I'm just gonna rent out my lake house, and so there needs to, if we're gonna do Airbnb, there needs to be an equal agreement with VRBO, which is the other vacation rentals by owner is the other large player in this.
Matt?
Well, there's a competitive imbalance already
Oh, absolutely.
between what's going on, and 3% is better than 0%, right? So shouldn't we at least take the first step?
Well, that's where I'm at.
$50,000 versus $0.
That's where I'm at, but I
And then
wanted
if we
to
can
come
get
back.
VRBO,
Well, I wanted to go back to Andrew to see if he wanted to do them all if he had a plan on how we would get there, and maybe we could do them all at once.
So I have a contact with Airbnb. I've tried to get a contact for VRBO, but I have not been able to do so yet. I'm going to continue researching and sending messages on LinkedIn. A lot of these people, like the Airbnb person, actually moved from Airbnb and now works for Zillow. So, so I had to find the other person for that. But I do think we should pursue an agreement with VRBO. It's just not as standard and boilerplate as the Airbnb one is, and they're doing hundreds of these, across the country and across the world. Just another clarification. So the 3%, while is a fee that's added on to the rental price. So it's not necessarily we're cutting 3% off from the host. So the host isn't making 3% less. They're just adding on 3% as a fee. I just wanted to clarify that.
Jim?
Yeah, and the piece with that, Brian, in regards to how quickly that can be initiated, Airbnb and VRBO both have legal counsel that are reviewing, legislation and new laws that are passed, and it's getting, if we sign an agreement, Andrew would have that information sent over, and it would easily be, an email would come to me as a Airbnb or VRBO provider in Washington County, letting me know that there will now be this much increase that will be added on to the consumer's bill. When I price things, it's still priced at what I want to make. And then there's still about, let's say I price something for, $500 a night to rent the house. There's still another, Airbnb takes 3% from me already for processing fee, but they've already got a marketing fee on top of that I don't even see. So the consumer might pay $700 for the rental for a night, and I take home the $500 that I want. So they're already making money based off marketing fee, management fee, and then they're taking a small processing fee off the top of it too. That comes from the homeowner.
Laura? Andrew, when you looked at the rates, is every Airbnb agreement 3%, or are there any that are not? Do you know?
From my understanding and the research I've done, I've got the page up right now that has, on Airbnb, they have, a list of all of the counties that they have agreements with. Some of them are, the ones that are the standard, like Livingston County, 3%. But, for example, Fulton County is 4%, Franklin County is 5%. So what that told me is that Fulton County and Franklin County have in their law a rate that's higher than the 3%. Did that make sense?
So we could structure our initial agreement potentially at 4% to match our current bed tax.
There's no reason why you wouldn't start.
Right.
Right. It's negotiating point. Yeah.
Right.
Start at 5. Finish at 4.
This is the meeting, we're not.
I want Jim negotiating for us. I want him on our team.
Any other questions?
So did we move forward with this, that we move in that direction to see if we can do something with those groups and also review what we would like to change in the law so that it's all ongoing at once, and it may take years to get there, but
Well,
we got to start sometime.
there's a statewide understanding of what needs to be changed in the state law to allow these folks to be charged through the regular process. That's not a new concept, shall we say. That's already been out there, and I think that is a lot of what, because remember, these agreements are, in the scheme of things, fairly new, not immensely new, but fairly new. And I believe personally that some of the impetus toward these agreements by the private guys is in this attempt somewhat to stave off a statewide legislative push to do this. So, if Andrew gets us the contact information, then that's great. We'll go ahead, we can talk to whoever we want to talk to.
So the bottom line is going to be enforcement.
That's always, but if the company is doing the enforcement.
No, the company's doing it on the contract.
Right.
If we change the law, then it's whether we're able to enforce that law for it to have any teeth to work.
Again,
And I think that's why it was wrote the way it was, if I remember right.
not necessarily, because we still enforce it against, it's almost easier when you have an organization to deal with rather than some guy, okay, or some private hotel, because
I think we're saying the same thing.
right, we don't have a Hilton, but boy, it's easier to talk to Hilton because they're used to collecting taxes all over the place than it is to talk to Guy, the 4-cabin, whatever, Bob, the 4-cabin place owner, who doesn't, may not
But yeah,
understand.
because we might not even know they exist, so there was no way to enforce it.
That's what I was gonna say, is I think you both are agreeing that the Airbnb is very easy to enforce, that Airbnb is gonna do it. I think Brian's point is that if we expand the definition to include those with less than 4 units, you're more likely to get the mom and pop that just has,
Maybe don't even know they're renting the house.
a tree house that they rent out or whatever, and you're less likely to know they exist. I think that's Brian's point. But I think we have the enforcement problem with our current law anyway, and it's being concerned that it'll be, harder to enforce those one-offs, I don't think is a big enough disincentive to move forward.
Jimmy?
We could ask Al, because he's the guy that's in charge.
Brian, I think it comes down to whether you're looking at a mountain or a molehill, because a mountain is Airbnb, VRBO. The molehill is the person who's renting their house, on the lake, by word of mouth or just a friend, So the big money is going to come from the Airbnb and the VRBOs. There are some smaller ones out there. Andrew can do some research on this, possibly called Tenter, and some other forestry, I think, is another one where you literally just rent a person's plot of land and bring a tent, or you rent a plot of land that already has a tent on it. But we're not getting occupancy tax from our tent, from our campsites, are we? Correct?
No.
We're not. We're not. So it might be a moot point, but that was my point. Is Airbnb is the mountain, and the person just renting their house is a molehill. You're going to have a couple of those. They're outliers.
Andrew?
So on the VRBO website, they say we collect lodging taxes from travelers in jurisdictions where we are required by law or an agreement. So we can explore an agreement with VRBO too, which I think if we just got those two while we're working on the law, we're doing the agreement, if we can collect on those two, it not only replaces the I Love New York money, but if that I Love New York money comes back, we'll be able to be more self-sufficient without county funds.
You want a motion to move this all forward?
Do you need a motion to keep
We don't need a motion to take Andrew's contact information and talk to people. If you want to do that, that's fine, but there's,
I just
you're
want
going to need a motion
I
at the
think
end.
we ought to just keep it moving is all.
I think the committee consensus is they really would like to keep it moving because it's potential dollars that we're losing.
Do it.
Chris and I can work with you and Andrew to get the information and go. I hesitate to make the first contact from a lawyer, and then the second contact back from a lawyer, and then you're back down to lawyers before you even get started.
So maybe you guys.
Man, I didn't even hear that bus coming.
I'll stand right behind you.
It's electric.
But I think it keeps getting set back to the back burner continually. I think we really need to chase after it.
Yep.
So I guess that's what they say, the committee direction.
You got James?
Oh, Jim, sorry.
Andrew, with NISTA really focused on hotels, and for those that don't know, NISTA is New York State Hospitality and Tourism Association. They're the advocacy branch, the legal advocacy branch for the hotels and resorts for New York State. They are starting to work with some of the regional marketing persons for like Lake George region and Finger Lakes region in regards to assisting with home shares. Has Mark Dorr been more open to working and assisting, because it's another avenue that they are going to want to look at for their revenues in the future?
Yeah, so we're not a member of that organization. However, I did reach out to Mark Dorr, and he was generous with his time. My thought was if he has these relationships that he can help us, we would join his organization, because now we have lodging that we accept, that we get some substantial occupancy tax, which we would need in order to afford to be a member of his. So yes is the answer, and he will assist us in any way he can.
And the reason why I bring that up for everybody is from an advocacy standpoint, they're down, they just like us, they have their days down in Albany. They're advocating for various things, and home share is something that I know has become more and more something. So when it comes to the state actually producing a law for an occupancy tax, they're going to be the ones that are going to help us push that forth.
It's good information, thanks.
Al?
Roger, is this one of those times where our sunset might actually be a benefit because we come up for re-auth every 3 years? Is that an opportunity to change some of the language?
Yeah, well, it's always been an opportunity, and I'd like to think we're so unique that we've come up with this idea before anybody else, but it's been out there for quite a while, and it really hasn't gotten any traction in the legislature because it would have made all these other agreements unnecessary. So we should keep advocating for a change that's universal, because it promotes fairness across the board, and I would expect us to continue to do that. But in the meantime, we play the hand we're dealt, and we have to deal with it. And are we in like year 2 maybe of our reauthorization? We didn't do it too long, but maybe 19.
Actually, I think we just did it at the beginning of this year or the end of last year, didn't
Yeah,
we?
I think we did it in 19, so we're,
Yeah.
At the end of the 19 session.
yeah. So, we just reauthorized our law. That doesn't mean it can't be changed, because if they were to raise our authority, we could, or increase the scope of it via another state authorizing or enabling legislation, we could certainly change our law to fit that. But right now, the one we're operating in is on a 3-year sunset, I believe. And it's subject to the same process. It took us a while to get that law, subject to the same process, as with any amendment. It's not very similar, exactly identical to the mortgage tax. So it's better to get to work at it in, say, the Adirondack Association of Towns, and you know, the Adirondack not local government review board, they organizations belong to right groups, because it's groups that are going to get the traction to regulate this. And you know, the city is where it's a big issue, because they're losing apartments to folks that are buying them as investment properties to rent out, rather than have them available for people that actually live in more urban areas. So I think the issue is getting some traction in terms of regulations of this industry as a whole. And so keeping abreast of those developments and being at the table to influence them in a larger group, which gives us a bigger voice, is probably the way to go to get the state legislative changes that we're looking for. We're not the only ones interested in doing this.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Good report.
Okay, what else did you have, Andrew? Because you said that was the end of your report.
Yeah, so I'll just do this real quickly. You know, Laura talked about how we pivoted our focus from promoting the county to being more of a source of information. We had weekly calls with NICEA and the other, all of the other TPAs in the state, which was great in keeping everybody on the same page, from reopening phases to best practices and what everybody was doing, you know, during the stay-at-home order. We created, as did many other TPAs, a COVID-19 page on our website that listed, mostly in the beginning, it was restaurants offering takeout, but then it was updated daily with new information as people were submitting it to us, or we were finding it on their Facebook pages or on their websites. And then Pamela, of course, being Pamela, out there herself, and sent us a list every day for businesses that were opening or providing services, such as, you know, mechanics. You know, everybody was looking for what was open in any way. We had over 300 businesses listed on that page, and it started to get a little out of hand, so we redid it, and it's broken out into categories, and that should be live today or tomorrow. Let's see, it was an extremely popular page that we put out on social media and was shared a lot, and we saw a doubling of traffic between March 15th and today. We've seen a doubling traffic when you compare it year over year, and that's users. So we've had twice as many users to the website as we did last year, and the number of users are up 60%, and the 83% of those users are new users. On one of the first days of the stay-at-home order, March 19th, we saw an increase of 1,225% year over year in the number of users. So people were using that as a resource to look for what's open, what are they offering, and we either gave them a link to their website or to their social media, or both, whatever they preferred. The top cities that people were from that were going to the website is no surprise: Queensbury, Greenwich, Saratoga, Granville, Albany, and Troy. I think that makes a lot of sense because they're our neighbors or they're our locals, and that's kind of what our message was: support local businesses. And it became really apparent when there were some meat shortages, and we started letting people know that you can get your meats and cheeses and things from Washington County, and we saw a great spike there. Social media, we stayed active, doing what many other destinations were doing. We were promoting our COVID-19 page, promoting any business resources or businesses that were open. And we experienced some substantial growth, having Facebook increase 22% in followings, and our Instagram following grew 49%. So that was very good with social media. Articles, we first paused the articles. We didn't want to come off as being insensitive or anything. But then as we were, we changed our editorial calendar to really promote what's open. First we did restaurants, then we did a golf one, and then the big one, which is extremely popular, was the food suppliers in Washington County. And the timing of that was perfect because it was right when, grocery stores and those kinds of things were running out of meat. So from a traditional media, we stopped all spending there, and we are not planning on doing anything until we know the fate of the I Live in New York matching funds. And yeah, that's about it. Any questions on that?
I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Laura?
Okay, so the only other thing I have to add is, we have a report from Lakes to Locks, because as you may recall, part of our, discussion on renewing funding for them was to do some more regular reporting as opposed to just year-end reporting. So Janet sent me an update. I can pass on the update, but I'll give you the highlights here. They are continuing to work with the National Scenic Byways Foundation to work on bills in Congress that'll get additional federal funding, which Lakes to Locks, they've been very lucky in the past to get some significant federal funding. They've also been involved in the Invest in America Act, which is appropriation for federal transportation, which is part of the Scenic Byways funding. And then also, similarly, the Great American Outdoors Act. So they too have concentrated on social media and marketing. I understand from this that Janet is reaching out to Andrew to kind of discuss how content can be better coordinated.
Yes, we have a call set up for tomorrow morning.
Okay. And they've done promotions, again, all via social marketing. I'm going to assume, the concentration is on things that can be done safely, like the Road to the Battle of Bennington, trails, etc. And then she's left a list of events. It sort of looks like they were very actively involved in the Washington County Fair until, again, sadly, that got canceled. So basically, again, I have some more details here about what events that they've worked on, but that's just to highlight that, despite COVID, that Lakes to Locks has been as active as they could be under the circumstances. So that's really all I have. Any questions in general?
Jay?
Yeah, back to the I Love New York, and Andrew's still on here. He's cutting back on the social advertising expenses and stuff, but that isn't going to cover the shortfall of the I Love New York. When we hit the point of our budget, how is that playing out?
Well, as I said, I didn't want to come to any definitive conclusions until we were a little bit, more sure whether I Love New York funding was going to materialize, but also I don't want to leave the decision so long that we've spent more money than we have. So again, based on the county budget, we have 82.5. We've spent about 55. So by waiting until July, if we haven't heard from I Love New York by then, we are going to be forced to do one of two things, which is to ratchet down tourism program to almost nothing, because we will only have like 20,000 left for the end of the year. Or the other possibility is going to be to very specifically decide whether what specific programs and activities we want to have continue, and whether we want to utilize bed tax to finish up this year, what's important, or whether we just decide that we're going to ratchet the programming down to what the budget is and leave it at that, and then leave bed tax for future.
Yeah, what I would suggest is that maybe Mr. Campbell, Mrs. Butler, Laura, and I should have a meeting prior to
I wasn't even thinking about it, but when Laura brought up bed tax, what are we reviewing what our bed tax looks like for 2020 now, as a result of COVID? I don't anticipate, we've been sitting around $18,000 to feel like the last 3 years in bed tax, right? Right, Al? Right around there?
I wish I had them right in
So
front of me.
while
I just gave
While
those
I
numbers.
was looking up that number, an interesting statistics for you, Jimmy, is year over year, and Andrew, I don't know if you have the number right there, but year over year, Airbnb use, April of this year to April of last year, more than doubled.
Yeah, I'm not,
During
Airbnb doesn't surprise me because it's a low risk for COVID and it's been promoted as a low risk across the country. I know that significantly hotel and motels, their occupancy level is lower. I know we're not really reliant on, the transient, business transient, but with a reduction in people traveling this summer, I do foresee that our occupancy tax might be down, year over year. So I'm just wondering if we, a review on that. That would have us a better understanding for July too, when we discuss this further.
Al?
Right, so in 2018, our occupancy tax was 21.6.
Okay.
We closed 19 at 18.2.
Okay.
We saw a decrease from 18 to 19 already. And a lot of our filers are annual filers. So there's only 1,600 in there right now because it'll be February of next year before we get some of the annual filers. We have a lot of those. But I would suspect that there's going to be another tick down again. At least two of my regular reporters are now shut down.
Closed, right.
Yeah. So whether they reopen under new management, I have two people that we're paying that are done. Doors are closed, doors are locked. I have two that I'm currently working through an enforcement process that I'm probably going to unfortunately have to involve Roger in because I've exhausted what's available to me. And as far as the occupancy tax reserve, the set aside, at the close of last year, that was at 49.2. So just kind of keep that in the back of your head. I wouldn't pillage the whole thing, but there might be some level of it that you are comfortable with.
Frank?
I was gonna go back and reiterate what I think Chris's idea was the best, that we get together and discuss that. The thing I wanted to go back to was Laura said that according to what we may be getting, there may be some things that significantly have to be done before year's end. So I guess I need to know what priority they are and what the dollar value is of those things that need to happen.
And I agree with that. I think that's something that Andrew and I will go over.
Okay.
It's based on the spending plan, what has been done to date, what we would want to prioritize needs to be done by the end of the year.
So if we can have that when we meet, that would be perfect.
Sure.
I think that's the right approach.
Dan?
Yeah, I'm a little confused, so just clarity on this. We have a bed tax, and it's on rental units if there's 4 units or more. Is that basically correct, what we have?
Yeah, there's a complicated definition. but
Yes, but as simple as I could say it.
Right.
And then, now Airbnb, did I hear you say they are willing to collect up to a certain amount of tax?
They have in other places, so we would approach them and say, since you're doing it here, in other places, will you do it with us and negotiate agreements? So they have evinced a willingness to negotiate these agreements. We have to initiate that process with them.
And I thought at one time we initiated that and was waiting for that dialogue to resolve itself. This has never been initiated then, is what you're saying, with Airbnb?
Not that I know.
Okay.
Well,
When we talked about it one other time, I thought that we agreed to initiate a dialogue.
yeah, we did, and we did have discussions with Airbnb, and Airbnb, this is what I said at the beginning of the company, we've been having this discussion for, I think, 2 years at this point. Airbnb, at the time, we were talking about the legislative changes required as opposed to an agreement. And I think because of the time, the county was, I think, more interested in the agreement side and changing the bed tax law, or the bed tax side as opposed to an agreement. It it kind of stalled. And now conversation has changed. It says, let's not mess with trying to change the legislative part of it and look at doing an agreement instead. So, again, we did initiate discussions with Airbnb, but it stopped because there wasn't it was a legislative change to our bed tax is what was discussed at the time.
So you're saying that they are willing to discuss an agreement
Yes,
now?
yes.
Then why, and I know you basically got a consensus to do that. Do you, or do we have a parameter? Do we have a baseline of what we want? Or are we gonna just, how do you speed this up? I guess since everybody's willing right now to do it, how do you speed it up? Because like you said, this is almost a year ago that dialogue started. Do you need more specifics to speed it up? I mean, do we have to have what we want present to them? Or do you?
My understanding would be that given that our lead tax is written for 4%, the will of the board would be to try to negotiate a voluntary collection agreement with Airbnb for up to 4% collections, with the understanding that 3% is likely what we're seeing.
Even though they've negotiated with other counties at up to 5%?
Well, that's not what legislation up to.
No.
Oh, they have legislation. Oh, okay, now that's the part that I was missing. Thank you.
Jay?
Yeah,
Chris or Roger, it kind of sounds like, listen, you guys, that eventually the state's gonna reset the rules and the Airbnbs, they're all gonna be included anyways eventually. So it's better to go for this agreement than try to push to change our county law?
Yeah, I think you'll have a sure thing in the short term. That will govern until the long term. And we found out with the mortgage tax how long the long term can be. And as I said to Brian, and I hope the rest of you, that it's unlikely they're gonna say, okay, Washington County, we're gonna make a change. It's more likely that you're gonna see a universal change, which at the pace the legislature usually moves, takes, first one has to be introduced, and then, so I think we'll get an agreement much quicker than we get a change in the law. And so rather than just leaving money on the table, what I'm hearing is let's try to do something now, and then when/if things change in the legislature, we'll address it at that point.
Any other questions? Think you're all set, Laura?
Yep, that's it.
You're all set, Andrew? Anything else to come before the committee today? Any others?
Al.
Oh, Al.
So for once, I actually don't have bad news for you. Try not to fall out of your chair. So for those of you that get the ASA magazine, I got it today, and there's a very familiar face on page 9 if you get a chance to look at it.
Who is it?
Alan, you're holding me in suspense, man.
Come on, that's half the fun, right? Let's see.
Double vanishing out.
Closer.
Oh, it's Alan Brown. I looked at it. It was taking me a minute. I can't see on Al's page, but Alan Brown is in it.
Nice.
I was trying to think whose articles were.
There's a 2-page spread about the Lewis Waite farm. So.
Yep. Okay, any other? A motion to adjourn.
Certainly.
Okay.